When people talk about moving abroad, the focus is usually on the dream, right? The better life, the opportunities, the freedom. What we don't talk about nearly as much are the things no one warns you about. And it's a little bit because you never know until you're right in those situations. It's, quiet loneliness that creeps in after all the excitement has faded. It's grieving starting over. It's identity shifts again and again. And sometimes coming to realize that you can't even go back home because home has changed too. Today's episode is about all of that. It's about the unspoken fine print of relocation. Don't worry, it's not a moody therapy session. It's more like nobody warned me, but I've received sense now. My guest is Gbemi Adekoya. She's a psychotherapist, a coach, a parent, a fellow zero-gen immigrant who has helped countless people navigate the emotional roller coaster of living abroad, and she's walked that road herself, so she has a lot to share. We're talking about loneliness, about healing, about laughter, about pivots. She calls herself the pivot queen, and we talk about the surprising wisdom that comes after the storm. So we'll start where we always do. What's your zero-gen flex? Miri, what's your zero-gen flex?
My zero-gen flex is becoming a therapist. Like, thinking about it, wanting to do it, and actually doing it. I sort of kind of feel like it's evidence that you can change the trajectory of your life and rewrite your story. So, yes.
I love that. So, wait, you're talking about rewriting?
I'm the therapist.
It's you. I love it. I love it. So, there's so much in what you just said, but let's talk about becoming a therapist, because I know it's inextricably tied to your journey of being here in the US. So
Right.
If you could talk about sort of real quick, like what you were before and even like what
Right.
triggered that decision and then how you became what you are now, the
Okay.
therapist.
All right. I used to be a tailor back in Nigeria. That was what I did from after graduating university. And that was like my full-time job before we moved here. And so naturally, I thought that was what I was going to continue to do. And we moved here. I had another baby. I had 2 more babies and decided, look, it's time to go back to school. Because if there's one thing that my mom taught me, it's that whatever your choice of career, whatever your choice of profession, get the best education that's possible so you can be the best at it. So I did a little bit of research and said, okay, fashion, given what I like and what I enjoy, fashion merchandising. So I enrolled in community college and I was going to get an associate's degree in fashion merchandising. And then one day I was praying. And the question just dropped in my spirit. If you won the lottery and money was not an issue, what will you be doing professionally? And the answer was not fashion. I was like, no, I wouldn't be a fashion designer or a tailor. I would be helping people because I like talking to people, helping them find solutions to what's going on, being a listening ear, sharing burdens. And then I Googled how to become a counselor in America. And
Was this all in that one prayer session?
all in that.
On your knees?
That's kind of like how my prayers are, very conversational. I say, hey, God, this is us again. How far? What are we doing? That's kind of like the vibe that God and I have, like this daddy. I think of God a lot like the way I think about my father before he passed away. So that's what prayer is kind of like, conversational. We're Googling, we're researching, we're writing things down, we're journaling, we're coming back, we're disagreeing, we're like challenging things and making it make sense. So that's kind of like what prayer is like for me personally. And so what's the profession? Counseling. How do you become a counselor in America? You need a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. How do you qualify for a master's degree? You need a bachelor's in psychology, which I later found out that I didn't need, but that was the information I had at the time. So, but I was like, I already registered for fashion merchandising in college. Turns out I could change my major. And so I changed my major. The associate's degree that would get me to a bachelor's degree in psychology was human services. So I did my associates in human services.
At this point, you probably already had a bachelor's in Nigeria.
At that time, I had my OND in insurance and a bachelor's in business administration.
Right.
Right. That I had graduated like 10 or so years prior.
Right.
And then I moved to America and I basically started from scratch.
Right.
So I went to community college as in starting out like as a year one student, and I did it all the way to getting a whole different bachelor's. So I got the associate and the bachelor's degree in behavioral science. Because when I got into the 4-year college, I realized that I didn't want to study psychology. And so I changed my major to social work, realized that I didn't want to be a social worker, and then found out about behavioral science, changed the trajectory of my life, introduced me to a whole new world of behavior modification. I got my minor in applied behavior analysis, became board certified in applied behavior analysis. Boom. Whole new journey.
I'm curious about two things. When you're realizing and you're making those shifts, like what exactly triggered those realizations and those, changes of mind? And two, how long did this entire journey take?
What triggered it is what continues to trigger the change even up until now, and it is why. Because every time I'll be like, okay, why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And the why will be, if it's not matching or if it's not aligning, I'm not ashamed or too hesitant to switch like lanes, because you can pivot. I'm the pivot queen. Like fashion designing, tailoring, behavioral science, clinical mental health counseling. Maybe tomorrow I'll decide that I want to do something else, and boom.
I love how you called yourself the pivot queen. Maybe that's why we're going to name this episode, because I do feel like a bit of a pivot queen myself, but I feel like I see it's like hinges that are connected to one another and kind of keep opening new doors that I may not have thought existed. So I mean, like you said, it's the pivot queen. It's not a. It's. I feel like you might have said that in a way that was like, yeah, maybe it's not so bad, but I think it's great. One thing, especially because the audience of this podcast is people who are making a new home abroad. A lot of people have to make a decision on, am I going to pivot? Am I going to, I came in and I was working in insurance.
Right.
Am I going to go and be in psychology? Some people may see it as a negative thing. Some people may see it as an opportunity. Like how did you approach? Was it like exciting? Was it like, oh my God, now I'm having to change my mind again,
I'm a very outcome focused person in the way I think. And what I mean by outcome focused is that I very often and almost always think, where am I going with this? And then I reverse engineer. So the part of what came out of that question session, prayer session was, what kind of life do I want to be living and where do I see myself, right? And so not just helping people, but I wanted to work in a field where money wasn't the primary driver, because I just almost always knew that I'll have a lot of money. Like, because if I'm solving problems, if I'm a solution provider, and whatever I've done, I've gotten really good at it, I will be able to earn. So yes, money, not to say money is...
Your name is Damilola, which literally means
God has elevated me
into
wealth. So not to say again that money isn't important, because if there's anything America teaches you is that you have to make money because the bills are, unending. However, if you think about the future that you want. So I was thinking about the future that I wanted, and I wanted to have the training that will equip me to help people regardless of, where I was, right? So what's the future that I'm thinking about, that I anticipate? And look, I can't thank God enough. I am quite literally living in that future that I was discussing with God some 14, 13 years ago, right? What's the end goal? What's the outcome? Reverse engineer, what are the steps that I need to get there, so that when it gets hard on the way, and it will get hard, you're constantly reminded about your why. So yes, pivot, because if you don't like your current circumstances, I'm a very firm believer in the capacity of humans to change their lives. You can change your life. You can quite literally decide that I don't like how things are going. I want something else.
So when you think back to when you first moved and
Mhm.
how you navigated all your career moves,
Right.
what are those times when you were like, nobody warned me? Or who sent me message? What are some of those points?
I think parenting will have to be the hardest one. Like the logistics of parenting children. For context, living in Nigeria, there's a lot of help available, so much so that you take it for granted. There's family, there's paid labor,
Because
there's
labor is cheap.
exactly. So it wasn't something that I actively thought about. And then moving here and having 3 small children and feeling incredibly lonely and alone. It was that part, was really hard, especially because there was no way to have been prepared, for it. So that was a big who sent me. Like I can remember one time my oldest was in, I think, kindergarten at the time, and the school had said, wear a yellow shirt. And then I got up that day and I was looking for a yellow. I knew we had a yellow shirt. And I was looking and I started to cry because I didn't have any help. I eventually found it in the dryer because I did manage to do the laundry and dry everything, but I did not empty the dryer. So I turned the whole apartment, upside down looking for a yellow shirt. We were running late. And then I remember just bringing everything out of the dryer and then finding the yellow shirt and shaking it. And I just started to cry because when I had this baby in Nigeria, because I had my oldest in Nigeria, we still lived in Nigeria at the time, I had a maid and a nanny. And the standing rule in my house was that you don't put a shirt or any item of clothing on my baby without ironing it. And then here I was, a few years later, shaking something from the dryer and putting it on him. And I just thought to myself, who sent?
You're like, I've fallen from.
Like it was hard. It
How
was.
did you? How did you? And I can just imagine. I have my own, story of crying alone in my apartment when I was in grad school, like my first maybe couple of months, and I was like, I don't have friends. I don't know how I'm going to like recover a social life. And then, a week later, I was at dinner in someone's house and I was like, okay, I think it's going to be okay. How did you, or like, what was the moment where you were like, all right, I think I'm going to be fine? Especially, I think it's important to like really call out that that's a big, you've already lived a certain standard of living and you think, you've given your children this idea of what life is like. And now you're falling from grace, and judging yourself. And I know there's so much internal judgment that marks, and even parents in general put them themselves. So how did you work yourself out of that? Even maybe not in that situation, but just in general, and start to feel a sense of, all right, it's going to be fine.
I think that the answer to this, if I'm going to be honest, is that from time to time, I still ask myself now, like, what am I doing? Do I even know what I'm doing? Especially again, as it comes to parenting. Because now that all my children are teenagers, it's a different set of problems that we have, or should I say challenges, or like I like to say to my children, opportunities for growth that we have. And so I still find myself asking who sent me, right? And so what I like to think of is that between the downtimes, like the times when you're unsure, the times when you're confused, the times when you're second guessing your choice to uproot yourself from what's familiar to a whole new country, is that there will be highs and there will be lows, and there's no very specific end date to the lows such that it will now then be highs going forward. It ebbs and it flows. So when you're down, I guess you have to rely on the evidence of the times when it got better to say it will get better again and we won't always be here. So for example, potty training was really hard. I can barely remember now, but we're doing a whole different level of training now. And then I imagine that in the next decade, it will be a whole different set of things that we're working through, opportunities for growth.
Right. Because your kids are all teenagers now. It's amazing.
Yes, it is, in fact, very,
It's amazing.
very amazing.
Because I've also followed your journey like through, social media and seen them since they were like born. I think even your last, like up until now, and
Right.
growing up and thriving, and you're doing amazing.
I'm grateful that y'all get to see the highlights and not the really messy and ugly parts, of which I can guarantee you that
I'm sure
they are interesting, if I may.
I always wonder about that because and I think I've even said it in a couple of episodes how like, okay, fine, like I'm not the age where a lot of my friends are having toddlers and thinking about becoming parents, and I'm just like, it's a whole ball game. Like this child is talking to an American accent. First of all, like, calm down. Let me hear. Let me even understand what you're saying before you even say, "Oh, mom." I think about it often, and I look at people like you who are doing it, who've done it, and continue to do it, and I'm like, there's a path. There's a path for this to work out. And like you said, a lot of times we don't see the behind the.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to behind the scenes that's not pretty. And I'm not, as somebody who's heavily divested from shame, perhaps because of the field that I work in, I'm usually quick to normalize the experience for people when they're having a hard time or when they're struggling, that because we tend to think it's happening to only us. Please know that, you're not the only one, and it's not always pretty.
So we have an audience question for our Dear Zero Gen section. And it ties a little bit into what we've just talked about, funny enough. So this person says, Dear Zero Gen, I'm writing from a tender place today. I've been living abroad for about 12 years now. And while my work and life here are stable, I can't shake this sense of loss that lingers. I often find myself thinking about home, about the kind of close-knit community and family gatherings we were blessed with as children. Now, as a parent myself, it aches to see my kids growing up without that same bond with their cousins, without the warmth and chaos of extended family around them. Some days it feels heavier than others. I miss the laughter, the spontaneous visits, and the sense of belonging that was just embedded into everyday life. My friends are scattered, my family is far, and while I'm still slowly building community here, it still feels different, smaller, more fragile somehow. Does this ever get easier? How do others in my shoes cope with this sense of longing and the gap between where we are and, where we want to be and the things that we miss? I'd love to hear how people make peace with being so far from the roots and the practices that shape them.
I hear the longing and the desire for what's normal or what feels like normal in that question. And I have to say thank you for asking what's on the mind of a lot of people that we often feel like we can't ask, because being able to move abroad and thrive, it's a privilege in and of itself. And so it's almost like you're complaining, okay, come back home. But being privileged does not magically erase the loneliness or the longing for what was or what could have been. So thank you for putting a voice to what a lot of people already think about. I'll share a quick story that might help answer that. Not a couple years ago, more than 10 years ago, because I remember my children younger, I was on the phone with my sister-in-law, and she was talking about how a maid had ruined her new blender that she had just bought, right? And then I said to her, you're complaining about a maid ruining your blender. I would love to have a maid. And she said something, and I have never forgotten it, because it has helped me at times where I will find myself missing home or longing for something at home. She said, you have exchanged one set of problems, Gbemi, for another. So while I'm worried about my staff, my domestic staff ruining my belongings, you don't have that specific problem that I have. So remember that if you lived in Nigeria, you will exchange America's problems for Nigeria. And if you lived in America, you will exchange. So that kind of helps shape my thinking when I wanted to complain about something, to acknowledge that this problem is specific to my situation, right? And so not to say that I can't acknowledge the problem because other people don't have the exact same one. It is that wherever you live, you're going to exchange one set of concerns for another. So as nostalgic as living at home can be, you have exchanged a very specific set of problems for another set. So it just helps to think about how do I then navigate this version without allowing the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia prevent you from working through them. Because it's almost giving, well, if I lived in Nigeria, I wouldn't have this problem. Girl, as a parenting expert, let me tell you that sometimes we think, oh, if I was raising my children in Nigeria, I won't have this parenting problem. See, the parenting problems that people in Nigeria are going through, it's a whole different set and version. So they may not have to worry about having a whole community of cousins and uncles and aunties, but they have a version that's different from yours. So perhaps if we didn't allow the nostalgia or what could have been or what should have been keep us from acknowledging the versions of victory that living here provide, we can then proactively think about, oh, I miss community. What are the ways where I can build community here now?
Yeah. What I really love about that answer, I think initially I was feeling that's not very comforting. That's not very comforting, but I think it's real. And the comfort is that you then see whatever challenges you're having as a dual thing where there's the privilege and the dark side
Right.
of it. And then in terms of what you can do, as you were talking as well, I thought about how, there's this, I have a friend who has this group of girlfriends who, like, I think are the ideal. So they all most of them live in Chicago, except my one friend who's here, who's also part of my, like, pod. But they have a pod and they all happen to be in the same age group. They have kids sort of in the same age group and they're all growing together. They travel together. If it's someone's birthday, they just went to Vegas together. And, when they have things at each other's homes, all the kids come.
Right.
So all the kids are growing up as cousins and all the kids are getting that sense of like what it means to be Nigerian as well as American, what it is to have aunties and uncles. And even here in Seattle, I have, like, we call ourselves COG, Children of God.
Nice.
But like, I think being intentional about, okay, now I don't have a pre-built in, my brothers are on the East Coast. I would love to be closer to them, but I'm not right now. How do I make that community here with people that I trust who also are looking for that kind of thing?
Right.
And how do we become that for one another? It takes a lot of intention, as I've seen from this, like, friend of mine with this pod of girls, but it's beautiful.
Right. So you're talking about redirecting the energy of, oh, I don't have this, which is valid.
Yeah.
Right. And at the risk of dismissing it is, can we shift or perhaps consider that the side effect or unintended consequence of wanting opportunity, which is often what
drives
the move. Yeah. The side effect is, okay, now how do I deal with this? So, because it will also be an assumption that we should challenge that everyone who lives in Nigeria has that. Is that the case really? That everyone who lives in Nigeria has that community of people that they love and they know that they can trust? Or was that something that somebody built intentionally that you enjoyed and then now just presume that everyone has? And does that mean if you're zero gen, because if you're zero gen, you're carrying a lot.
It's called zero gen for a reason. I call it zero gen. You're starting from the bottom.
So now, in fact, let's look for a highlight. This gives you the opportunity to write a new story.
Yes.
With a new code of conduct.
Absolutely.
Or with new rules of engagement.
Absolutely.
And then intentionally build the type of community that you want to build, perhaps virtual even. Because I remember back when COVID happened, my daughter had turned 10. And prior to the lockdown, we had been planning that we're going to have this big celebration, but there were no
parties. Because 10 is big in Nigerian culture.
Exactly. And there were no parties or anything. So we had to have a Zoom celebration for her. And we realized that we had all the people we knew and loved in that room because of the restrictions. The restrictions forced us. So going forward, we started to involve the people that we knew and loved in our celebrations. The 10th birthday of her brother a couple years before, we didn't include anyone who wasn't in our, wasn't
City.
estimate. Exactly. And so new circumstances force us to think differently. We can acknowledge and validate the feeling of longing and then say, what can I do with what I've got now? Knowing that nostalgia makes us think that everything was good back then. Was it really?
Was it really? Because if it was, would we have moved?
Right.
So pivoting a little, what has brought you the most unexpected joy in this journey of, parenting? It could be, parenting a career or, being a wife or just being a person in America. What is one or two things that have brought you that you just did not expect and, brought you joy?
As somebody who insists that my identity is not just being a mom, parenting my children and watching them grow into these amazing humans. Sometimes I look, I was still telling my daughter yesterday, like I asked God to give me a daughter and he gave me you. They're like, I don't think you realize how amazing you are. And she smiled and she was like, I know, mommy, I know. I said, I don't think, that the opportunity to shape and grow like lives. It has really been such a great experience because as intentional as I am, I don't think that I would have been so if I had continued to live in Nigeria like I did. Being in this country where I did not have as much support forced me to be like involved. Exactly.
Yeah.
So because, for example, I'm a very energy efficient person. People can use other terms like lazy, but I'm energy efficient.
I love it. I'm energy efficient too.
Thank you. That's critically important, right? So as an energy efficient person, if I lived with access to direct labor, I will take it. So for example, I would have a nanny. In fact, I have this whole place I travel to in my head sometimes when I miss home, where I imagine the elaborate life I would have lived if I lived in Nigeria.
That's hilarious.
I can describe it to you with great detail.
I love it.
Because I will have a governess who will also be our Secretary of Education. Like she will be bilingual and she will have a master's degree in childhood education.
Fantastic.
Right? And she will supervise everybody's academic work. So I don't have to do any of that. And then every week at our meeting, she will provide a report of areas for growth and how everybody's doing. So child A's chemistry, child B's SATs, that kind of thing. So that will be our Secretary of Education. And each person will have a tutor, right? And then we will have instructors for tennis, for language, right? Where would I be? I will be on a plane to a vacation, traveling somewhere, but have a whole system running because I can pay, people to sort all of that for me.
But
when I wake up,
however,
and I come back home,
nevertheless,
then I say, excuse me, Madam 10th grader that has just started taking chemistry. How is that going? Because I don't know any chemistry, right? And so having to be involved in my children's lives to the point where I know what's going on with them and their friends, who's falling in love, who's falling out of love, and all that kind of thing. I think that that's one of the highs,
right,
of my experience living in this country.
Especially because you said initially that you were adamant about not defining yourself as just a parent.
That's so important.
And so it came out the corner and it's the thing that gives you the most unexpected.
Right. It's my most important job, the one that takes most of my time and my effort. I don't think anything drives me to my knees as much as, parenting does and has. It is quite the job.
As we start to wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, right? How you said, in this era of your life, you are in extra time.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
I have suffered significant loss of people who I love. And that has forced me to be, it has forced me. And I use forced intentionally because I didn't choose to be like very intentional about like life and joy. But I've lost both my parents, I've lost two older siblings, and a lot of like, so when I think about how I'm still here. So for context, right? My mom died a few weeks shy of her 44th birthday. And then my oldest sister, she passed away 20 something years ago. She was in her 20s. And then just a couple years ago, my oldest sister, who was only like 13 or 14 months older than you, were close,
Right.
thick as thieves. She passed away as well, a couple months shy of her 44th birthday as well. I want you to begin to imagine what getting to 44 felt like for me. That none of the women in my family of origin, in my nuclear family, got to 44.
Yeah.
I was petrified, if I may. It just felt like maybe there's just something about, so I was like, maybe that's why life feels so amazing, because it's supposed to be short and sweet and sharp. But then I thought about, I wouldn't want my children, to experience that. But then my oldest sister has two daughters who are my daughters now. They experienced it and they're thriving. So I didn't think it was impossible, but I knew I wanted to still be here because I feel like God has given me so much and he wants me to, give back, out of all of that. And so I couldn't even bring myself to pray, dear God, don't let me die. Because I had prayed that prayer multiple times and the people that I loved still died. So I don't think that the biggest miracle is a person not dying, right? I feel like death is what it is, like transitioning to eternity, and that's what you have to, that's like a rite of passage, and then it's left for those of us who are here to cope with that. So I then had one of the many conversations I have with God where I said, okay, you know what? If I don't make it to 44, it will be because that's your plan, right? If, however, I do make it, I'm going to treat that time as extra time, right? So, like I said prior, every time now when I wake up, I'm like, I'm still here. Okay, God, it's like you have a plan or something that you want me to do. All right, let's get to it. Yeah. And part of that plan has to be enjoyment, because my middle name.
What's your middle name?
My middle name is Mogbaduola.
Are you serious?
My grandfather, my dad's dad, named me that, and it's translated to enjoy. So that's why I'm the queen of enjoyment. So I say, okay, we made it here. New day. What are we enjoying today? So it gives me, so rather than dread or fear about dying, which I no longer have,
I'm happy to hear that.
It gives me like some kind of enthusiasm and a reason, right? So that's why my why is very important to me. Impact is important to me. I like to think that after somebody comes in contact with me, they have improved outcomes. Like after I meet somebody, they're smiling. After I meet somebody, the issue that they had that brought them to therapy has now been resolved, or at the very least alleviated, right? So that's kind of like how I live. And I think it's such a beautiful way because I have a certain sense of freedom from like fear and like trepidation, because if today is the last day, it would have been such an amazing ride. Sorry to all the people who now have to cope with the loss. I too had to cope with the loss of the people who passed away previously, and we're all going to be okay. Because at the end of the day, this life that we're holding on to so much, is it not just like the journey? Is eternity not our, final destination?
That is such a fantastic note to end on. Gbemi, I'm so glad that you came on the Zero Gen podcast and that you walked us through your multiple pivots through life as a parent, through your philosophy on extra time. That is so beautiful, so poignant, so real. I think even I can borrow a little from that feeling of extra time for reasons that are a whole episode, a whole separate episode. But thank you so much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation.
I'm glad that you've invited me. And I know I told you before, but I need to say it again for the camera. I think it is great that you are a doer, that you have an idea and you are actioning it. It's fantastic. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. That's all, everyone. See you next time. Bye.